happy to take any questions or discussion at the end. And I have done it really in two halves. One is the sort of the recent performance in the council area, and then in the second half, I'll talk a little bit more about both the kind of central outlook for the council area, and then reflect a couple of reflections then on what city deal could mean in terms of kind of additional growth in the area. So I'll come back to that towards the end. In terms of the kind of the general outlook, I suppose before getting down to the council area, I mean, I think at this stage we're entering a sort of a cautious optimism after such an uncertain year and our nearly 18 months with COVID. I think when we recently released our outlook, we talked about potential of light at the end of the tunnel, and I think that still holds. Though obviously, there's the uncertainties around the Delta variant and perhaps a kind of another surge in terms of cases, if not hospitalizations, hopefully. So we've good and uncertain factors there. The fact that the government supports, albeit now they're being tapered, like furlough, have prevented mass unemployment, I think all of us would agree has been a good bridge to the recovery, and hopefully will work out that way. The vaccine rollout has proved a positive in recent times. There's the digital is not a move to digital. It's not a kind of totally unalloyed good. If you notice on the other side of the ledger, there's the shift to digital and what that might mean for retail, and I'll come back to that again. There's a kind of consumer demand for normality. I think that's a positive thing. And then a question that many, if not all, certainly household finances have received a boost during lockdown. I think one thing we've probably seen very clearly with the pandemic is the uneven effects and uneven impacts across society of that. Some of the uncertainties then are ones that I could have gone into in any shape or fashion in recent years, around Brexit, around the productivity challenges, and around the sort of some of the more COVID related ones, what level of employment scoring we might have post-COVID. So I'll just come back to that. I see Councillor McKeever said sound is not there, but hopefully people can hear me okay.
I can certainly hear you, Owen. I'm not sure if it's just yours. Yeah, a couple of other members are coming in. Councillor Heaney indicating sounds okay. So Jim, it might just be at your end. Continue on.
I'll carry on then, Chair. So, I mean, in terms of the recent performance, one of the things that we've seen in recent years is good, strong growth in terms of economic output and GVA in the council area, and in fact ahead in recent years, in the recent recovery period, ahead of the growth rates in the north of Ireland more generally. So we've seen that this is a longer run. We haven't seen that, but in the more recent years of the recovery since 2013, there's been good growth rates in the city area, and we've seen those in particular in a number of sectors. Accommodation showing good growth, administration services, but also healthcare more generally. And what we see with the 2020 figure there at the far right of the chart is the impact of COVID there, and the impacts of COVID have probably been much more clear in terms of economic output, largely because of the kind of shutdown of the economy for months at a time than they have been in the labour market. Nonetheless, they're probably beginning to show there. You can kind of see that in the unemployment numbers. Sometimes we use, and I know this is a confusing thing, sometimes we use what are called the unemployment rate, the ILO, which would show lower percentages than the claimant count. But I think in both cases you're seeing a higher than the Northern Ireland average historically, and a mirroring trend there of an upward swing after a few years of falling rates, an upward swing in 2020. So that's something to think of. The other question around that in the claimant count has been whether that rise that we saw in 2020 has now peaked. The May 2021 figures would suggest that there's a kind of leveling out, if not a falling away from the peak that we would have seen, say at this time last year, where the sharpest rises were happening. The key question, though, I think in all of that, both claimant count and unemployment rates more generally, is what happens after furlough. At the latest figures for the council are that around about 4,000 jobs are still furloughed. Half of those on full furlough, half on sort of flexible furlough. In the local economy. So question is what happens to those over the next number of months as the supports begin to be tapered. That's, I can come back to that really in the discussion. There's a number of ways of looking at how that might go. So with unemployment, the fall in claimant count, the fall in unemployment rates more generally are sharply attached to the rise in employment that we've seen with a mix of private and public sector jobs there. And some increases, as I say, they're in higher productivity sectors and higher productivity jobs, advanced manufacturing, so on and so forth, and professional services, some ICT jobs there that we've seen, but a good strong growth of 9,000 and so jobs over the most recent years. A bit of a fall off in 2020, but probably, as I said earlier, that would have been much worse except for the furlough scheme. And economic inactivity has also had been falling too, and you can kind of see on the blue line, that's the council area, the light blue, and then the Northern Ireland average rates for inactivity. So always ahead or higher than the Northern Ireland rates, but falling away close to a question what might have happened now in 2020. It's still not clear. If it follows the north more generally, one area of inactivity that we will see is numbers of students who weren't able to pick up part-time job coming into the inactive group there. So that's the kind of the recent performance. In terms of the economic outlook, then one of the things we'd see throughout these is that the city deal, the bounce or the additional growth that could come from city deal, and that's probably most clear really in the population area. One of the things that we will see if we didn't have the city deal and the bounce that might bring in terms of more students coming into the city, but also more people coming in for new jobs, and probably even more pertinently really for the resident population, people being able to stay and work in the city for jobs that they might have had to go elsewhere for. And I think that's a crucial factor in it. So you can kind of see that we would expect the working age and the more general population to increase there, and indeed the fall that we would begin to see in working age population, that's sort of 16 to 64 year olds. We don't believe that will happen under the city deal scenario. So that's that. Bear with me 1 second here. So in terms of the baseline forecast we expect for GVA, you can see the fall there in 2020 in the dark blue column, and for that, and then we're expecting to see average growth rates of 2.2% out over the next decade. This is the baseline forecast, slightly below, so it's going back into more trend areas there of slightly below the Northern Ireland average. With City Deal, we expect to see that accelerate. So that would be what we're looking at there is additional over and above the baseline growth. So again, what we're seeing there is as the City Deal projects begin to take off and we're able to kind of build those into the forecasts over time, we would expect to see greater levels of output, additional wages to grow in there, and in particular in two sectors, ICT and manufacturing. And I'll come back to the manufacturing point in just a moment. We would expect, given some of the projects that are there, those would be driven forward quite strongly in terms of an additional 6% growth over and above what the baseline would give us. In terms of employment forecasts, again, going back to the scenarios without City Deal, we're expecting to see growth across all three scenarios from 2022 onwards. So 2 years really, 2020 and 2021 of falling numbers, and then a pickup 2022 and 2023 more slowly, and then more quickly out for the rest of the decade after that. But important to kind of see the different sectors here. Two sectors I think just to highlight that'll be under will be growing more quickly than others. Again, ICT that I've mentioned before, healthcare we expect to see as a driver across all three scenarios there, and we would then see pressure in two sectors in particular, retail employment being under significant pressure and one to be monitored, and manufacturing to a lesser extent. You can kind of see the sort of falling figures across that in the between a fall of 100 jobs up to a fall of 800 jobs in manufacturing. So that's a one to, as I say, to be watched. And bear in mind that that's kind of without City Deal. When you build City Deal in and the additional investments attached to that, we then expect to see an additional 7,000 200 jobs over and above that employment growth we would be looking at. So an additional 9% in total jobs out to 2032. A lot of those jobs we feel can be filled by residents with some of the employability supports that are going to be in place, and with migrants and new population filling the other 30%, which will add to the population numbers there. So we expect the additional growth to be in strongest in jobs requiring level 4 qualifications and above. So you're looking really at foundation degree, modern apprenticeship and upwards really there. So the employability supports under the Inclusive Future Fund will be critical, I think, to bring people up to those levels and to that speed. So that's the kind of the outlook. We see modest growth really over the next couple of years in terms of the baseline numbers, but we do believe that with the heads of terms and as projects come through under City Deal and more generally under the strategic growth plan as well, we expect to see additional growth bounce from that. We do still hold out, and I think the City Deal does promise that transformation in the local economy as it recovers from COVID. And the points I've made there in the previous presentation I gave, partnership's going to be absolutely crucial in that, both within the city and with other partners outside the city. Still critical risks posed there, as I mentioned, by Brexit, higher than average inactivity rates, and the delivery of the key enabling projects will all be critical to the success more generally of the city. And one thing I suppose there to think a bit about is what opportunities there might be there in the wake of COVID and then the recovery for COVID for redevelopment of the city centre. Does the kind of decline of retail offer other opportunities city centre wise? That's a question I suppose the council will grapple with. And what opportunities might come with remote working hubs such as Ballykelly, but also more generally from the new world of hybrid working that I think is here to stay in some shape or fashion. So some opportunities there, some risks, but I suppose above all, the continued focus on the plans that are there within the strategic growth plan and within the City Deal more generally, I think are going to be critical to the success of the city. So happy, Chair, to stop sharing and take any questions people might have from that.
Appreciate that, Owen. It's quite comprehensive to date. I'll invite people in to speak if they wish at this point. I see a number of names popping into the chat box, so go ahead. First speaker is Councillor Doyle.
Chair, thank you, Doctor, for a really insightful presentation. I have 3 questions, if you don't mind. Primarily, the one thing that I didn't see mentioned, and I was surprised, and maybe not all that surprised, was there was no mention of the Northern Ireland Protocol, so-called, and any impact that is having or might have on the local economy. I know it's been made much of with regards to people saying that there are significant difficulties for businesses, that, you know, people talking about food shortages. There are things that I haven't seen. Could you maybe give us an insight as to what impact, if any, you think that might have? In terms of you know, the figures that you mentioned there, particularly around retail and around young people, is there anything that you think this council can do, even in engaging with stakeholders, to try and arrest or try and adapt in some way so that we can ensure that students who are, for example, coming to look for part-time jobs, or just young people in general who would normally start off somewhere in retail, if we can do something about that? And I know it's not covered in the report. My final question is, obviously we've got a significant poverty, and particular child poverty rate in the district. Do you think that the impact of the City Deal, for example, will be universal in terms of those stats? You know, will we see child poverty and poverty generally coming down in terms of the census and the multi-deprivation measures that will come from the super output areas in the next number of years? Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Doctor.
Okay, thanks, Emmett. Owen, I'll take a few of the speakers that have indicated and then bring you back in again. So next indicated speaker is Councillor Mooney. Sean, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dr. McGuinness, for that very comprehensive and detailed presentation. I think Councillor Doyle touched on one of the points, or the point I was looking to make. The one that really caught my eye reading through the presentation was in relation to the section detailing about retail. Wholesale and retail, obviously, it's just sitting behind health and social care as one of the main drivers for our region and for our city and district. I think it's down to 16% of the workforce. And obviously, at the start of your report, I noticed there was a term that you used that was with the consumer demand for normality. Would that have any impact really on the apparent decline in retail? I think that you projected that there could be a loss of maybe 700 jobs between 2020 and 2030. And obviously, retail being a very, very big part of our local economy. Is there any, and obviously looking at with the news about the Richmond Centre being in administration and things like that there, and obviously hearing the news of Gap closing their stores, is there any evidence or any views that you have that could provide our council area with any evidence or any information, as I think Councillor Doyle did say, the arrest the decline in that sector, because obviously it is a huge important because for part-time employees and things like that there. But really, that's the one that caught my eye, and I was wondering, could you give us any information about it anyway? But thank you, Dr. McGuinness. Appreciate the presentation and you come here today.
Good, thanks for that, Sean. Alderman Hussey.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dr. McGuinness. Reference some of the earlier stats, the claimant count, the workplace employment, I think the economic activity levels. Are they all on the same base, or are they, I suppose, coterminous at source? In other words, the claimant count, is that based on the claimant's address or their previous workplace? The workplace employment, is that based on the worker's address or where they actually work? Now, the reason I'm asking that is sorry, I have a pup barking in the background here. The reason I'm asking that, in the southern part of the council area, the south of Strabane, we would have a considerable number who would have employment in a different council area. So it's the coterminosity of the various figures and how they all match in. With regard to City Deal, my colleagues will be well familiar with the language that I use here. Is it fair to regard that as an urban project? And I suppose the question is a rural council that I need to ask. And I ask it because City Deal was sold to me as a councillor and to my colleagues at the time as being something that was a benefit to the entire council area. So, I mean, I'm still trying to get it into my head. What's in it for a rural population? You mentioned partners outside the city. Can you identify some of those? And when you say that, do you mean partners outside the city within the council area or beyond the council area? And I suppose, is there evidence of inequity, of benefit beyond the city that I, as a rural councillor, can hang my hook on, shall we say? Because it is a growing concern. Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Derek. I have 3 more indicated speakers, but we've had 3 already, so I'll bring you in now, Owen, to answer those initial 3 questions, and then I'll move on to the next 3 speakers after you've concluded.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try and deal with a couple of them together. I think Councillor Doyle and Councillor Mooney mentioned the question of retail. I'll come back to that, and then there's the broader impacts of City Deal that Alderman Hussey and indeed Councillor Doyle started at the start. Maybe to get the elephant in the room or whatever out of the way, the Northern Ireland Protocol. I suppose I tend to deal with that as an ongoing uncertainty, more tied in with Brexit. I think we haven't got where we're going to finally get to, I suspect, in terms of Brexit and what it might mean. I suppose for anyone involved, and no matter what side of the debate you might be on that, I think everyone would accept to some degree or another the disruption that was going to accompany Brexit, and the disruption that's now accompanying the the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol, or where we might end up finally with the Northern Ireland Protocol, is there too. I think what's clear when you speak to kind of, and this be people I would speak to generally, when you speak to businesses and business representative groups, it's around the uncertainty, I think, as to what the final shape of the protocol might be. How, for two reasons, I think. One, how closely aligned UK regulations will stay to the EU, which would mitigate a number of the issues around it, and on the other hand, how closely regulated or enforced some of the issues around the monitoring the single market on the EU side will be. And that is really, I suppose, where the negotiations will have to play out. And until we see the end of those, we will not know the level of ongoing disruption that we're likely to see from that. There's the other side, I suppose, and this is something that often perhaps gets lost in what's happened since January, is the opportunities associated that can be associated with the protocol. That, I guess, still has to play out. We'll kind of see what FDI decisions are made over the next couple of years to see how that might play. But I suppose one of the reasons I don't mention it much is around the kind of the fact that much of it is really remains uncertain around Brexit generally, and the protocol more specifically. In terms of kind of moving on to retail, if that's okay, the two questions, I suppose, from both Councillor Doyle and Councillor Mooney maybe touch on the same point in some ways. As Councillor Mooney pointed out, retail is a critical sector in all local economies. In your own council area here, it's around about 16% of total employment. It can vary between sort of 15 and 18% across the 11 council areas. So it's an absolutely very important sector. And there's two things I think to think about around retail, more generally as an employment thing, as an employment force. One is the point that Councillor Doyle mentioned there, and that is the kind of opportunities that it often allows people for part-time work. The second one is that when we think of growth within the sector, we'll continue to see it even if we lose jobs, because of the churn of jobs within it. It's a sector through which a lot of people pass and move from job to job, in as well as having a core staff that stay there. So we will continue to see opportunities there, even in a sector where there's a loss of jobs. I suppose that's an important point that might be a counterintuitive point, but an important point to bear in mind. In terms of the more general future of retail, it's a tricky one, and a lot of minds have been put to work on this over over recent years. Two things I suppose tend to stand out around it is that I think one is the potential shift in terms of where retail is located, and the point that was made about the Richmond Centre probably highlights that. We go through phases with these things where shopping centres become very popular and then fall out of popularity. It seems to be difficult at the moment for older shopping centres to kind of continue to renew themselves. So there's a difficulty in some spaces in the retail sector. The other thing I suppose is around the town centre management issues seem to be key there, or in even around advertising opening hours, a consistency around opening hours, all of those types of things. The streetscape, keeping that as kind of pleasant and as welcoming as possible. The fact that I think in many ways, when we've seen this over the previous 10 years, our town centres are changing in terms of the offering there, in terms of the kind of shift over towards a kind of more cafes operating alongside retail, whether or not we kind of see ourselves reinvented as kind of recreational centres, of which retail forms one part. But as I said, bigger minds than mine have been put to work on this. There's again, it's a bit like the Brexit piece. There's a lot of a journey still to go on that one, without me kind of being able to come to a definitive answer on it. In terms of the city deal and the poverty rates and the urban feature, I think one interesting thing on this, I'm not a huge fan of the idea that rising tides lift all boats equally. I don't think that is the case, but I think one of the things that is there and very critical to to the city deal on two sides. One is the fact that the Inclusive Future Fund has a lot of employability measures built into it. I think that ought to, on its own, allow many of the jobs coming along and other jobs that will be associated with the general growth to be accessible across all parts of the community. There will also, I suspect, if things work out as you would hope they would, and I'm basing this on some of the city deal experiences in Scotland, is that rural areas around, not as kind of, you know, gentrified or commuter areas, but that generally there's a kind of a sub-supply and a supply chain opportunity there for local enterprises across rural areas by what happens in the city. So I think Alderman Hussey's point is right, but there may be opportunities there that, as time goes on, will be in to see both employment and supply chain opportunities there for the rural parts of the council area. The technical question there, Alderman Hussey, and I'll leave it at that. The coterminous point that he makes, he's right in terms of many of the stats we use. They're resident based, like inactivity, claimant count, ILO unemployment are all resident based ones, so that's based around your residence address. The workplace ones then are kind of based around the workplace. And what's interesting, I suppose, more generally, is that leaving aside, the stats don't really tell the full story. They would say that Derry City and Strabane tends to be a very enclosed workplace, but that leaves aside the cross-border commute element of that. I think that's something to kind of bear in mind, that there is a fair outward and inward commuting flow, not only of surrounding local government districts within the north, but with County Donegal as well. So it is an area that commuting is key. And hopefully that answers the three councillors' questions.
Yeah, thank you for that, Owen. I do have, as I said earlier, another indicated bunch of councillors, so I'm going to bring them in the order. So next speaker is Councillor Sandra Duffy, and then Councillor Farrell, and then Councillor Heaney. Go ahead, Sandra.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me in, and thank you to Owen. And it was good to get the presentation in advance, but I was also at the Northwest Strategic Partnership meeting, so we did touch on it there. But Owen, thank you, and I know that retail has already been covered, so I did not speak about that. But you did mention there in terms of the Inclusive Future Fund, and I suppose from a Sinn Féin point of view, we believe that developing the skills agenda is what is going to be key going forward around the recovery, making sure that those who have lost work are reskilled and ready to re-enter into the labour market. But also that there should be nearly a bespoke approach around it, and extending that furthest to those who are furthest from the labour market, ensuring that they are upskilled as well to benefit from whatever jobs come out of the city deal and the Inclusive Growth Fund. I know that we have talked about it before, but we have talked about also including skills-based programs similar to what we had through the community work program that came out of the Executive Office. That was a really good program that got down into local communities and was able to skill up people and get them into employment. People who have been unemployed for significant lengths of times, and they gained those skills. So it needs to be at that level as well. Then just, I suppose, touching on other elements of it, I suppose the health and social care sector, we expect employment in that to take shape over the next decade, because we have the medical school there combined with stratified medicine projects. So we think that will create opportunities as well. Tourism, we do think that tourism will probably be one of the sectors that will bounce back quickest around the city and district, and we're already sort of seeing an uplift in that even locally over the last wee while. But as a city and district, we need to agree what our tourism product is and how we're going to best sell that. Then I suppose I'm not going to touch on the foreign direct investment, but I would ask a question just in terms of we often talk about the need for grade A quality office space for the development of the city and district. But I suppose maybe a question on that is, how do you think that the whole working from home ethos that has developed over the past year and a half will have an impact on that? Because we have seen people working from home very effectively. You know what, we obviously need the connectivity around suitable broadband and fibre optic broadband, but just in terms of that and how that might impact on the grade A office space ask that has always been there. And then just probably finally, just to finish it off, I think that as a city and district, we have come out of this relatively well, and we were in a good economic space. There's lots more for us to do. There is immense work that we do have to do, but as a city and district, we had crystallized our economic policies. We had decided what our key projects were that we wanted to take forward and how we were going to do that through our strategic growth plan and through our city deal bids. So we were in a good enough place with that, and we just hope that we are in good state moving forward, especially if the Department of Economy then can develop sort of Northwest specific set of policies that we can develop then, that cross-border approach that we're already doing through the Northwest Regional Development Group, and I suppose ultimately reduce the economic duplication of tax systems, and you know, so we need that harmonisation of tax across the two jurisdictions, leading to Irish unity. But I'll finish on that. But just I suppose the only question I have on there is around the impact of home working. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Duffy. Councillor Farrell, Rory.
And thank you, Dr. McGuinness, for the very comprehensive report. There's a lot to welcome on there, but you know, there are some concerning statistics. You know, we've got the highest claimant count in the north. We've got the second highest rate of economic inactivity. We're in the bottom half when it comes to wages, and we're on the wrong end of the scale in terms of people whose wages are below the living wage. I think everybody can agree that we want more jobs and better jobs, and we're confident with full implementation of the City Deal projects and the strategic growth plan that we will see more jobs and better jobs. But we need a policy shift from the Department for the Economy. Our council's position is that we need to see strict targets for InvestNI in terms of foreign direct investment and job creation. And Sandra has mentioned it. You know, we've written to the Minister for the Economy requesting a dedicated Northwest economic policy. And the feedback from the department that we got at full council was that this has been transferred to the Executive Office. So there seems to be an element of pass the parcel when it comes to engaging with the Northwest, and it would be remiss of me not to mention the appointment of Mr. Gordon Lyons as the Economy Minister. It'll be interesting to see if under Minister Lyons' tenure, whether Belfast continues to get the lion's share of funding and opportunity, or whether there's going to be a change of direction and approach. So I have one question, Dr. McGuinness. There's a lot of projects included in the City Deal package and our strategic growth plan. Which one, if you had to pick one, is going to have the biggest economic impact in the Northwest? Which one is going to create jobs and make life better for everyone here? Thank you.
Okay. While you're pondering your answer to that one, Owen, I'll bring in Councillor Heaney. Connor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Owen, for the presentation. It was excellent, and I'd like to, just at the outset of my remarks, just declare an interest. I work in the employability sector, which I just put that on the record. But the sort of question and the point I wanted to make, like obviously the overall picture that has been presented here is relatively positive, given the circumstances where we're coming from and what we've come through. However, you know, we also live in a city and district that has some of the highest deprivation figures anywhere in the north, and indeed possibly in Europe. So a concern of mine that has been for quite some time, that if you know, we do create employment, do genuinely turn a corner on a bigger picture across the city, but we leave the communities that are in dire need and in poverty behind, then the whole project will have failed, in my view. You know, if the people who are able to take up these new jobs that are being created are people who are coming back to the city from other places, or from outside the city, indeed, you know, then we'll have missed an opportunity to try and, you know, really make a difference to some of the very dire statistics that this city and district unfortunately holds. So the question really is, how do we avoid that? How do we ensure that there is a link between whatever we can generate employment ways through the strategy and through the approaches that we're taking, that ensure that the communities on the ground that need it most are improved through that process. So that's my question. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Connor. Owen, I have two other indicated speakers. I have Alderman Devaney and Councillor Harkin. Are you happy enough for me to take them as well, or do you want to try and take those three? Yeah, okay, that's grand.
Oh, happy enough, yeah.
Thanks. Okay, go ahead, Morris, and then Councillor Harkin. Alderman Devaney first.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me in. And can I just thank Dr. McGuinness here for coming along, giving us the presentation here today. And, you know, I just want to talk in, he talked rightly in around about employment in the council area, and this would have been far worse only for the furlough scheme, and many of us have welcomed that funding, you know, really benefited us coming from the UK government to help in that furlough scheme. For people to pay their mortgages and rates and all the bills that they pay, you know, and you talk about the city deal as well, Doctor, and yes, it's about students and jobs and investment in the city, and you know, inviting people to come and live in the area. And I do take on Alderman Hussey's concerns about rural, but you've answered part of that there, that there possibly could be supply chains from the rural area. One issue that is going very well at the minute is house sales and stuff like that. But when we look at, as you quite rightly talk about the retail sector, a very important sector in any town or village or area, and it creates a lot of employment. I do agree with you that maybe town centres have to look at how they re-image themselves as we come out of COVID and in around the retail sector. And especially now, Doctor, with a lot of people who maybe weren't able to get to shops are now shopping online, which is going to cause problems for the likes of those shopping centres that you mentioned there. And I do agree as well with one of the previous speakers that, you know, as we come out of the furlough scheme, if there are jobs to be lost, or, you know, we're going to create jobs, we need to have the right skill agenda in there to be bringing the right skills forward for more modern jobs that are coming forward, and would welcome that upskilling for any new sector that's coming in. And we need to be upskilling along that. And as someone else has said as well, tourism is very important. And at the moment, that has been a difficult area and around tourism. But generally, Doctor, I would say, and I have no questions because they've nearly all been asked before when I came in here, but I do believe we are in a fairly positive area than what we would expect it to be in when we look back maybe 15 months ago when we were coming into the start of COVID and around all those issues. But I do believe we're in a positive area. And once again, thanks, Dr. McGuinness, for your presentation.
Okay, thanks for that, Morris. The final indicated speaker is Councillor Sean Harkin. Sean.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dr. McGuinness, for your report. And I did get to read it from beginning to end, and a lot of the stats in there are very, very useful. And again, you know, this is a forecast and predicting what's going to happen to an economy, given all the kind of various things that are happening internationally and domestically, you know, is difficult. And so I wouldn't criticize you if you weren't on the mark with everything as we see how things play out over the next year, 2 years. But even a forecast is useful because it allows you to kind of try to make some plans. So I suppose the point I was going to make is, it's been mentioned already, but we're way behind here from where people would want to see us in terms of the Northwest and Derry. We've got very alarming deprivation statistics. We've got escalating inequality that's very clear that the pandemic has only reinforced. And I know people are hopeful that some of the new things that are being developed can change that. But you know, that we'll only see that if it's evidenced. So my question really is about the policy shift here, because I feel like from the beginning of the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement, that there has been from the bigger parties, from the Stormont executive, an attempt to rebalance. It's called rebalancing the economy of the North through kind of slashing taxes for corporations, reducing the size of the public sector, you know, which means cutting funding for the health service, allowing privatisation, private companies to come in, undercutting the housing executive's ability to build, and a whole series of other measures that's really about, you know, reducing the size of the public sector. Now, 20 odd years ago, when neoliberalism was at its height, reducing the public sector was very much in fad. And I think all the big parties here, to one degree or another, have pursued that. And I don't believe that strategy has benefited the vast majority of people in this district. I actually think that it's reinforced inequality. More privatisation and taking away public sector jobs and public sector services hasn't led to more equality. It's actually increased equality. It's driven down wages. So I think there needs to be a policy shift that can really only come from Stormont. One is more generally for people across the North about acknowledging the failure of the economic model that they have pursued, which is reduced wages, reduced access to services, undermined their public services, led to more equality that can be seen in every health inequalities, the housing crisis, everything. It might have benefited some people because there's more millionaires in the North now than ever before. And then that's true for across the North, but then it's particularly true for Derry in the Northwest, where we have the legacy of, historic inequality and historic deprivation. So my question, if you want to take it on, is more about the overall economic model that of undermining the public sector and saying that it's less efficient somehow than the private sector, which is, you just look at capita, right? There's another example of like a corporation now that is making huge amounts of money because the public sector has been scaled back, which is really, where's that money going? It's not benefiting the vast majority of people in our district. It's lying in the pockets, I would say, of the corporate chieftains in capita, and there's many other companies just like that. So there needs to be a policy shift. I think it's about anyway. You get the drive of the question there. I don't think that the economic model is working, and I think it's actually serving to reinforce existing inequalities. Thank you again.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Owen, I know I said I'd bring you back in after Sean, but Councillor Donnelly's indicated he wishes to speak as well, so I'll bring in Gary and then back to yourself. Go ahead, Gary.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the report, Owen. But I'm sure you'll forgive me if I don't share a lot of enthusiasm regarding this report. You know, we've been here before. There's been many false dawns, false promises. And as outlined, Councillor Harkin said a lot of the stuff that I was going to say about the inequalities that the people of this city in particular and district are facing. Some people will call it peripherality. I like to call it discrimination. You know, how do we as a city and district get, you know, it seems to be that the further away you go from Belfast, you know, Belfast seems to be the centre of the universe here. The parties here are all Belfast centred. You know, have you factored that in, and how do you break that down? I know it's the responsibility lies with the political parties based in Belfast, but you know, have you seen any evidence that we're moving away from that and that Derry and Strabane and surrounding areas are getting a better deal? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor.
Thanks for that, everyone. Owen, that's a fair broad range of questions from across the chamber virtually here this afternoon. So I'll hand you back now to go through the answers as best you can. Thanks.
I suppose, Councillor or Chair, I mean, time-wise, just so I kind of I can keep an eye on the clock here rather than eating too much into your time for the rest of the meeting. If I sort of take five minutes or a bit more.
If people appreciate this is obviously something that's significant to ratepayers right across the council area and indeed beyond this council area. Yeah, so happy enough to allow you the time to respond to the questions asked on.
I think, I mean, a number of them, I suppose I'll try and deal with the specifics first and then maybe come back to the more general questions and there's a kind of a core question, I suspect, around inequality that was raised by a number of the speakers there, a number of the councillors. So I suppose trying to deal with maybe some of the specifics Councillor Duffy mentioned in around the remote working and working from home and what that might mean for office space and indeed the grade A ask in particular she mentioned. I think the key to this appears to be that we at one stage, I suspect back in the autumn, we were kind of thinking, oh, this is going to be the death of the grade A office and perhaps even city centres to some extent. And I think that has possibly been overdone and we've moved away slightly or to a large degree from that. A lot of the kind of surveys now of employers would suspect that the press will be for a hybrid model where people will be in the office 2, 3, perhaps 4 days a week and working from home less than that. The grade A question will continue. I think you'll continue to get companies wanting to have the most up-to-date office space available to them, not least for the fact of some of the other issues around emissions, energy efficiency, some of the other issues around kind of access to technical and other abilities if there's going to be hybrid working there, where somebody could be working from home and still be part of team meetings within the office. So I think the grade A space will probably be the one that's okay. It'll be those that are maybe 20, 25 years old and trying to upgrade that could be tricky for some of that space. A little bit like I mentioned on retail there earlier, it'll be the older space that might have more redevelopment to be done to it. So hopefully that answers that as best I can on that. Around the just sort of thinking some of the tourism was mentioned there as well, and I think it was Alderman Devaney. I'd agree with Alderman Devaney. We were likely to see a kind of a good bounce back with tourism, with the accommodation sector more generally. I suppose, and this was a question that was asked by Councillor Duffy as well, it's going to come down to the question of the product. At the moment, obviously, there's the staycationing model is the one with very few international tourists, for the island of Ireland as a whole. Never mind for for the northwest. So that's kind of part and parcel of that shift. We might see some towards the end of the autumn, but it will be another year, I think, where the staycation market will be the key one. The product becomes quite interesting in that if, let's say, you have hotels that have long relied on bus tour numbers coming through, what does it now mean in terms of, in fact, does it now mean that you're actually getting a better bang for your buck if you're filling the rooms in the hotels? It might well do. So there'll be an interesting kind of, I think, revisiting by hotels, B&Bs, so on and so forth after this year, just to see what the product actually looks like. After that, I suspect we might see new directions taken, that some tourism providers might actually feel that the staycation model is not a bad one to try and get more out of. So that's something, I suppose, to watch as time goes on. Many of the other questions there, I think, probably come back to the inequality point. And I think I'm thinking here really Councillors Farrell, Councillor Heaney, and the last two speakers, Councillor Harkin and Councillor Donnelly. And I don't think there's anything in it that I would necessarily disagree with, actually. I think in the first side, I think the stats certainly are concerning on some parts of it. I think once we've seen good employment growth, we've seen increases in above average increases actually in economic output in recent years. We still have, the council area still has some of the worst figures and the worst rankings in terms of the kind of inactivity rates and other issues like that, claim account numbers, the HBAI numbers there about households in poverty is another issue. So there certainly are concerning statistics. The big difficulty in all of that is often around how do you disentangle what are kind of legacy issues and what are issues of more recent growth and indeed even future growth, leaving people behind. My sense of it is that I think if the growth, let's say the growth was sort of set up around City Deal and the projects were there with no employability supports at all, I think the point that Councillor Donnelly made at the end, that we've been here before and this could be a continuation of that, I'd fully agree with. I think if that was the case. However, I think the fact that there are a lot of the employability supports built in, and I would caution on that. I think they mentioned there that they need to be bespoke. We've a range of employability supports that we're going to need there, depending on how far away from the labour market participation people are. It's very different employability supports for people with illness or disability than perhaps with others who have recently lost their job and have spent 10 or 20 years in the labour market. That's a very different offering. So they will need to be bespoke. We'll also need, I suspect, as time goes on, to be continuing to upskill people of those who are in work. We're very poor in the country. We're very poor across the island as a whole in that space. But I think we've begun to realise that in recent years. There's a lot to be learned from the south, I think, in that area in terms of upskilling in work, which I think is going to be critical as the economy continues to change. And I think unless we're doing those things, some of the issues that people have mentioned there around both regional and sort of income inequality will continue, if not worsen. Unless we're doing that other hard work. It doesn't often seem that it gains dividends short term, but I think in the longer term, there are dividends to be made. And I suspect Councillor Harkin, I think, can probably, actually take heart from how, some of the debates, we're now debating issues around inequality, income inequality, regional inequality. 10 years ago, some of those questions wouldn't have been raised in many meetings that I would have spoken at. And if I was to have raised them as a speaker, people would have looked at you sort of sideways of, is that an issue at all still? So I think the fact that these things are being debated now is a positive thing. I think, yes, I suspect more needs to be done in terms of policy, in terms of policy targets around regional balance and balanced growth. But I think it's now, for making those cases around the kind of changes in the economic model, I think it's more open door perhaps than it would have been even, as I say, 5 years ago and certainly 10 years ago. So I think I would take heart from what has happened over in that policy space, what has happened over the last 18 months. And I think many of these things, recovery is going to have to build in some of that kind of bridges back to the labour market that might not have been the case before, where people would have just expected the market to take care of it. So I'm hoping that answers the question. Hoping that's answered on an optimistic note. And I'll hand back over to yourself, Chair.
Owen, thank you very much for all of this afternoon. We've had a good debate now for nearly an hour, not only for today's discussion, but also for the paper that you circulated in advance that people will have had a chance to read through and to get their teeth stuck into. So I really appreciate the time that has been devoted to today. And I'm just seeing the chat box here. Alderman Hussey, are you looking to make a proposal, Alderman Hussey? Is that right?
That's correct, and it's pursuant to the presentation.
Okay, so if we just bear with us then, John and the committee clerk, I think it's Nuala that's on today. Can we get Alderman Hussey's proposal up onto the screen for everyone to have a look at, please? Members, if you just bear with us, I'll try and get officers to get this proposal up onto the screen. Okay, thanks for that. I think it's Paul. Alderman Hussey, do you want to speak to the proposal? I'm conscious you just read it out there, but is there, happy for you to propose it, and then I'll invite comment.
I need a seconder, obviously, before I can comment.
Okay, is there a seconder for the proposal?
I'll second it, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Doyle. Okay, Derek, you can
Thank you, Chair. Like, I don't intend to labour the point on this. I think we've talked about regional imbalance, but I think what we have also heard in the presentation is that potential that all ships will not rise with the rising tide. So I think we need to be aware of that within our own district council area. And when I refer to the opportunity benefit to all of our citizens, I'm not just talking about what I usually do for our citizens. I'm talking about every single citizen in our area, that we make every effort to ensure that nobody is being left behind, that they have opportunity to benefit. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alderman Hussey. I'm conscious that that most of the thrust of what you said in proposing it has already been addressed in some extent through the City Deal Working Group already in its meetings, but also back initially when I think it was around 2016, I brought the initial motion to the council in relation to city deals, and at that time it was clear that it was agreed that it was to be city and district wide, but so we don't have an issue with the proposal on the screen. Is there anyone indicating that they want either to speak to it or have any view on the proposal that's on the floor? Not seeing any other names coming into the chat box. Councillor Doyle, yep, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to Derek for bringing it forward. Look, I get where he's coming from. I think at the same time, we have to be very conscious of the previous work that has gone on long before I was here, and I know that there's been a lot of business done in terms of quality impact assessments and all the rest. Obviously, all of us would want to see. I mean, I want to make sure, obviously, that the people of Ballyarnett get as much of a whack of city deal as anyone else. I'm sure members from right across the chamber will want the same for their own respective DEAs. But it would be interesting to see, and maybe John might come on here and enlighten us as to how we actually progress this in terms of encouraging mitigations to ensure an equity of opportunity. Are there other mechanisms that we can put in place that we haven't necessarily done so far to ensure that there's widespread equality of opportunity arising from the city deal? Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Emmett. Councillor Harkin.
Thanks, Chair. And I'm not on this committee, so don't actually get a vote, but I thought I would give an opinion on it because I suppose I welcome the point that Alderman Hussey is trying to make, that and it was made in the discussion, that there's a way in which city deals, rather than actually reducing inequality, have actually expanded them. If you look at the record across the water in different parts of England, and if he could maybe clarify, because sometimes I know Alderman Hussey has been a voice for rural areas, and maybe that's what part of what he's trying to get at, and I would agree with that. But there's also the issue of just more general, like who benefits ultimately from the city deal. And I suppose I'm thinking in class terms. Will working class communities across our district be further left behind? So for the sake of the motion, maybe if you could clarify that, and if you could speak about what mitigations would he have in mind, because how do we make sure that tens of millions public money, mostly, that is coming into our district, benefits the vast majority of people. I think these are absolutely crucial questions, and these are going to be the issues that this whole model and whole proposal is tested on in the coming years.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Alderman Hussey, do you want to respond? See, you have yourself unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can respond to that. Councillor Harkin, I mean, I have said there, benefit of all of our citizens. I'm not just talking about rural citizens. I totally take on board the point that there are those in the urban areas who may be left behind. And with regard to mitigations, I've said to continue to seek, develop and encourage. And within that, I'd be mindful that Council does constantly try to encourage through government departments, whether they be at Westminster or at Stormont, an input to the well-being and the means of well-being for our entire population. So that is what I mean by continuing to seek to develop some of our own. And we've had some of that, you know, through the COVID recovery business programs, etc. All of those issues, but you know that we're just mindful of the possibility or the potential for an increased economic imbalance, which you've already referred to, and it's not just rural areas; it's everywhere, and all classes of our citizens. And I suppose particularly mindful of those, has been rightly pointed out in the presentation and questions, who have been maybe in employment for 20, 25 years, suddenly find themselves out of work, and the need to retrain, you know, the retraining, all of that sort of stuff needs to be there to ensure that they have the ability and to at least have the opportunity of trying for some of the benefits that will come along through City Deal. But it's not just about City Deal. I understand that City Deal has its own remit and its own projects, but to ensure that we develop projects beyond City Deal to help address the internal imbalance. And I'm also mindful, very mindful, of what I think it was yourself described as the Belfast-based parties. The party may be based in Belfast, but I'm very much based in the area that I represent, John. So yes, I take on board your point. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks. A couple of other indicated speakers on this, Alderman Devaney and then Councillor Duffy. Go ahead, Mars. Alderman Devaney, are you?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, yeah. Go ahead,
Yep.
Mars.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me in. And look, our party has no problem in supporting the proposal here. And I know what Alderman Hussey is getting, that it's about everyone getting a fair share across the council area. So it is. Does this have to be seconded, Chair? Has it been seconded yet?
Yeah, it's been seconded by Councillor.
No, that's okay, because I'm quite happy to do so. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Mars. Councillor Duffy, Sandra.
Yep, thank you, Chair, for allowing me in, and apologies there, I missed a bit of the conversation. My internet wasn't good and I had to log out, but I agree with the sentiments of the motion in front of us. It is important that no one in our city and district is left behind or disadvantaged because of City Deal. It is important that the benefits go out to all our communities and everyone contained within them. The whole rising tide may not raise all boats thing is grand, but we should be doing everything we can to raise all boats, and that's where Alderman Hussey there has comments. Absolutely agreed with everything that he said. Just want to point out though, in terms of Belfast-centric parties, our party headquarters are in Dublin, but we are very much rooted in our communities, but we are happy to support this motion. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sandra. Okay, Councillor Mooney, Sean.
Yes, thanks, Chair, for letting us in, and obviously really supporting this motion. Obviously, I can see where Alderman Hussey is coming from and the sentiment contained in the proposal. Perhaps the name itself, City Deal, doesn't do much justice in the fact that obviously it has to benefit everybody else who live outside the city as such and in the rural regions. But happy to support the motion. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, folks, I'm not hearing anybody speaking against the proposals on the floor, so I'm happy to accept it as unanimous unless anybody wants to indicate now that they were opposed to it. So I'll leave the chat box and the floor open for a few moments. And I'm not seeing anybody indicating any dissent to that, so happy enough to accept that as passed unanimously. Thanks, Alderman Hussey. Members, that concludes item 7, which has been debated at length, and thanks again to Owen for his presentation and the time afforded to it here this afternoon. So moving on to item 8, which is the physical council and committee meetings update. That's pages 101 to 104, and I'm going to hand over to Ellen for this item. Thanks, Ellen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Purpose of this report is to seek members' views on the operation of physical council and committee meetings. By way of background there, the report highlights that at the July meeting of council, there was a discussion around the potential recommencement of committee meetings in the Guildhall from July onwards, but it was noted that that given the sort of the increasing spread of the COVID Delta variant, that we would continue with exception to the planning committee with virtual committee meetings and council meetings during July, but to reconsider the matter with a view to potentially holding physical meetings in September. Members at that meeting also sought clarity in terms of the operation of the physical meetings, and hopefully this report will perhaps clarify that. A number of key issues probably in terms of the meetings themselves. Any meetings in terms of physical meetings would be subject to social distancing, risk assessment and the prevalent public health advice. And in the current context, then looking forward, we were looking at in terms of the support arrangements and capacity for meetings, and therefore at this point in time we can only envisage that committee meetings could be accommodated in the interim in the Guildhall chamber. Again, as the council chamber under current social distancing arrangements can only accommodate 14 elected members on the main floor, then we would see that the way to operate this would be only inviting committee members to attend the physical meeting. And again, where a member of the committee can't attend, we can actually facilitate a virtual access. Again, in order to mitigate risks, minimum number of officers to be in attendance to ensure the effective operation of the meeting and to support the chair. And as highlighted there in paragraph 3.2, virtual access can be accommodated for non-committee members, and there are 2 options available under the hybrid operation. And they're set out in the table. So essentially one of them is sitting in the chamber with your council device and using WebEx, very much the same as what you're doing at home, and what we did for the annual meeting, or going back a wee bit towards where the traditional model where you use the microphones in the chamber, and the participants on the remote meetings could be viewed on screen. The only limitation there is highlighted is that the cameras aren't hooked in as such. So we're currently doing investigations in terms of what the practicalities are around integrating the camera system into the WebEx and YouTube approach that we have at the minute. I suppose again in terms of health and COVID safe measures, a 3.4 that's proposed, again for members' comment today, that physical meetings don't last more than 4 hours. And if it looks as if obviously it is going to last more 4 hours, there should be an adjournment and the meeting rescheduled. We would also highlight that probably, and because we have been here before, that if there is some capacity within the chamber, we may need that again for some public access, again depending on the regulations. But if we did then decide to open up that spare capacity to non-members of committee, again would highlight that option 1 is the only option that would work. And also, again, based on experience, we probably need to put some sort of arrangements in place to manage who gets in when, and our order, again, is to ensure there's a bit of fairness around it. There's no, as highlighted in the report, proposals at this stage to take council meetings into a physical arena at this stage. Again, as highlighted in the report, it's noted that subject to the agreed way forward, there may be implications in respect of access to meetings for Section 75 groups and that sorts of things that come to mind there, people with caring responsibilities, disabilities, and people of different genders. Also, potentially climate changes impacts, which we might need to assess as well. And so for the recommendation, we're very keen to get members' comments in relation to the operation of physical meetings going forward. Thank you, members.
Okay, thank you, Ellen, for taking us through that. A couple of indicated speakers. Alderman Devaney, Morris, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me in, and I thank Ellen for the presentation here today. And I was one of the voices that talked in relation to hosting physical meetings, and I did highlight the ongoing increase in infections. And Chair, I think we have to be very, very careful as we move forward. Look, listen to the news every day. There is talk about another wave coming in mid-August, and around that time, maybe towards the end of August. And I would have concerns about hosting even meetings in September. I would prefer that maybe the idea was brought back to the relevant committee, or this committee, or the relevant committee again, just to discuss that issue early in September again, so we have a very much up-to-date view of what has happened with if there is a new wave coming and where it might be at. In relation to the options, Chair, look, I looked at option 2, and I do worry about using the microphone speaker system, you know, as everyone speaks into them, and difference and the maintaining and cleaning them and making sure that they're germ-free or whatever you want to go. So I would prefer option 1, Chair, and I would be happy with option 1. But just on the physical meetings, again, I would like someone back in September again to discuss the issue when we get back after the break, rather than saying now that we have meetings in September and we run into difficulties. I think it should be an issue, should be discussed at the earliest point in September to have an overview of the situation. And one thing, Ellen, that I do think is there's something that we should look at is when we get back to physical meetings again, and it's something that I've was to mention many times, was I think for us using our iPads and stuff like that there, I think we should look at getting them. Now, I'm not very technical, I think it's USB plugs installed for everyone in the chamber, because the other way we have to carry chargers and stuff like that. The other, if we had USB plugs in, we would be able to just plug in our cables when we come in, because many times we're away without chargers. Just someone to add on, Ellen, to your job, but thanks anyway.
Okay, Morris, thank you for that. Councillor Fleming, Paul is next. Go ahead, Paul.
Thanking you, Martin. Thanks, Chair. On behalf of Sinn Féin, Martin, first and foremost, to thank the officers for the work in terms of the report, and obviously looking at the different aspects as to how we would want to get back to a situation that I think we would all welcome, and that is back on to the meetings in the one room and back to a degree of further normality. And again, the report is set out, and obviously there's a number of variables there as there is associated with COVID in general, and things can move. So I understand to a point what Alderman Devaney is saying in terms of coming back in September, but I think that if we're in a situation where we're moving or have the ability to move towards this hybrid model, and we would take a bit of guidance from our own IT people who have been obviously very helpful and very assistant over the whole course of where we have found ourselves in the last year. Take a bit of guidance from them as to how best the equipment would help us to carry on for now in terms of the hybrid meetings. But I do think it would be important that as soon as we can safely get back to the meeting and face-to-face, then I think that sends a signal as well to the wider community out there, and in my view is more than helpful in terms of getting the business done. So we would be of a mind that if the conditions as set out here in terms of the safety, because in terms of obviously the cleanliness of equipment and all of that there, I mean, that's something that can be physically checked and physically done. Then I do think that if at all possible, we should move back the hybrid situation in September with a view to obviously, hopefully, before much longer, able to hold the full council in public as well, because I do think it is important that our business is back in the Guildhall and in our council settings, and that it's back in terms of the eyes of the public. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks for that, Paul. Next indicated speaker is Councillor Mooney. Sean.
Thank you, Chair. And just like Councillor Fleming said there previously, we would be of a similar mind. Obviously, bearing in mind, given the current context, and obviously health and safety being paramount to both staff and members involved in council, we would be of the view of mind to maintain the status quo until September, but very much of the view as well that obviously if the conditions did prevail, the hybrid model would seem to be the reasonable one to go for. That would allow members to go back in the committee under the conditions outlined by Alan in the paper in a safe manner, and then obviously with a view down the road then to maybe even looking at full council. But at the moment, we'll be guided by obviously officers in relation to the current medical advice and the conditions that will allow us to go back into the chamber in September. But also looking at the fact at the moment that the planning committee is sitting tomorrow in the hybrid function, and so it sat last month as well, and perhaps maybe any learnings can be drawn from those 2 meetings that could possibly guide officers forward and maybe getting us back in the full committee meetings. But obviously we would be of a similar mind as to what Councillor Fleming proposed, and to carry on that way. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that, Sean. Alderman Hussey, and then Councillor Doyle.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Alan. I'm not sure when Alan drew this up, and I presume it was before 1st July when the restrictions were altered, actually, and I have them in front of me here. I mean, we're at a situation now where restrictions are down to 1 metre. I presume that has been taken into consideration. And, you know, I look at these, and some of them are particular regard to hospitality. I could invite 5 of the members on this here to a meal now, and the 6 of us could sit around the table and have a meal together. You know, I think we have to, as other members have said, we have to target getting back into face-to-face, eyeball-to-eyeball meetings. So no, I think we'll go Dutch on that, Councillor Doyle. I feel that every opportunity should be taken to return, and as others have said, safely. I mean, it's a fluid situation. The situation could change before September, but we should be planning for at least the committee meetings getting back into some sort of normality. I note in 3.3 that you refer to the cost of replacement of the voice system in the Guildhall. It was my understanding, I think the last time I was in the Guildhall, that system is not quite working as it was supposed to do, because I think we had a voting system and everything else on the system that was there, but it just didn't work. So it probably needs replacement anyway. You know, and that's something that should be taken into consideration going forward, a proper upgrading of the system. And indeed, I know other councillors, for example, use the system as a queuing system for contribution to debates, etc. So, you know, there are different things that could be looked at between now and a return, at least for committees in September. Thank you, Chair. Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks for that, Derek. Councillor Doyle, Emmett, yep, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Alan. And supposed to reflect a lot of the previous speakers' sentiments. I would obviously like to get back. It'll probably be the guts of a year almost for myself and a lot of your members who have never actually had a seat in the Guildhall at all. So of course it would be good to get back. I would be conscious about two things, obviously, and I'm sure it hasn't been looked at yet, but I know under 4.3 it mentions about staff resources. You know, do we need to have conversation with unions, for example, over the summer to ensure that their staff are happy enough that mechanisms are put in place to ensure their safety? I didn't know, for obvious reasons, the fact that the system in the Guildhall didn't work. I would be keen not to spend any money if we didn't have to. But if a system isn't working, like Derek has said, maybe we do need to look into it. But certainly happy to go with the general consensus. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for that, everyone. I don't see any other indicated speakers, so I'm going to hand back to Ellen just to wrap this one up.
Through the Chair, I mean, at the foremost of all of the decision making is the fact that we ensure both elected members and staff are safe. So as I say, in terms of drawing up the paper, it did predate the new regulations, but and again, just following up in terms of Councillor Doyle's comments that he has never had the opportunity to be in the chamber. You know, members may decide that a phased approach might be something that they want to consider. The paper came forward probably because members seemed to indicate that they wanted to be in a position to make a decision for the September meeting. As you say, highlight that there is an evolving situation. So if we'll find a mechanism maybe of getting an update into members early September, and which to inform a final decision maybe going forward, if that's helpful. Thank you, members.
Yep, thanks, Ellen, for that. I think the Chief Executive might like to comment in as well on this. John, do you want to add anything on to that?
Yeah, thanks for bringing me in, Chair. Chair, just listening to this sentiment of members, we have been planning for some time for a physical return into the chamber, as you all discussed at the full council meeting at the end of June. So we can most certainly accommodate that. It's really just now at this stage a matter of timing. So if members are content, what we will do is we will continue to plan for perhaps a September return to committee. Bearing in mind, obviously, that we'll be in recess during August with no council meetings or ability to take further decisions. If it were to be the view of members that you would prefer to return in committee in September, we will plan for that. And should the situation change dramatically, we'll keep in touch with you informally toward the end of August. And you may wish to informally then signal a change of course, but should the situation remain fine and improve, we will plan for physical socially distanced committee meetings, if you're happy with that.
Yeah. Okay, John, thank you. I think that's a fair reflection of the comments that we've heard from people here this afternoon. So members, we'll proceed on that basis, okay? And happy enough to take that as agreed, unless anybody wants to outline any opposition to it now. And if not, thanks to Ellen for
Sorry, Chair, I just wanted to come with a very quick comment there.
Okay, go ahead, Ellen.
Do we know, I don't want to overcomplicate it, but I know a lot of our councils across the north have the same number of members as us. Do we know if there's any kind of ingenious method that other councils have maybe come up with? Because I mind seeing just from Twitter, I think it might have been Antrim, up around Antrim, where, for example, in their committee meetings, people were able to sit fairly close together because they have perspex screens. I think I might have seen that from an alliance councillor at one point. So, you know, if there's other ways that maybe we can do this that kind of kills two birds with one stone, it'd be helpful to know. Thank you.
So you, Chair, look, there are all sorts of mitigations, members. I think while we're working on the 2-meter rule, we can accommodate committees with the 14 members. We can work them physically, safely. People constantly talk about the science. I'm not so sure that a physical perspex screen that only goes up about 1 meter above head height makes any impact if you're there for 3 or 4 hours. I'm sure it makes some impact, but as I say, we've risk assessed all the rooms. We know how we can run committees physically, and my suggestion, if you're in agreement, members, as I say, if things don't change, that we put that in place for September, and then we see how we go, and there may be improvements we can make if members find it uncomfortable.
Okay, thanks for that, John. And I see a number of councillors in the chat box indicating that they're agreeable and content with that approach. So we'll move ahead on that basis if members are content. So as I said earlier, if anybody has any opposition to that, now's your chance to register it. And if not, we take that item as agreed. Okay, thank you for that, folks. Item 9 is the annual Equality Progress Report. I think back to you, Ellen, for this one, please.
Yes, through you, Chair. This report seeks members' comments and approval in respect of the Council's annual equality report for 2020/21. As indicated in the report, we're required to submit an annual report to the Equality Commission by the 31st of August each year. And as I say, that forms the basis of this report. I would highlight to members that the Equality Commission provides us with a template. So we have a very prescribed format which we have to follow. And as indeed at 3.1, we have indicated there the overview structure of the particular report. In overall terms, members, again, despite the challenges of COVID, we have been able to advance elements of our equality action plan, and as highlighted there, in terms of areas such as leisure, physical access, participation in public life and volunteering, access and to information and skills development, and job opportunities for underrepresented groups. And indeed, there have been initiatives in terms of targeting particular Section 75 groups such as school children, post-primaries and youth. Also things like linguistic diversity, Black and minority ethnic groups, older people, and in terms of tackling issues such as remembrance, exploring identity, community cohesion and community safety. The paragraphs of 3.3 onwards up until or paragraph 3.3 highlights a number of initiatives which are provided in the report with greater detail, but it gives members hopefully a wee bit of an idea in terms of the range of projects that have been taken forward. I would highlight as well that these projects are not owned as such by any one section, but rather they're examples of a work across the organisation, which arguably reflects our commitment to embodying our Section 75 commitments into all of our service areas. The report itself, in terms of implications, there are no particular equality implications there, nor is there sort of other implications in terms of legal. And indeed, again, I would highlight that, as I say, all job descriptions ask people to comply with and actively promote Council's policies on all aspects of equality. Again, re-emphasising our commitment. The recommendations in front of members today is subject to your comments that the annual Equality Progress Report is approved and is submitted to the Equality Commission. Thank you, members.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Ellen. I'll open it up to the floor. First in is Councillor McHugh. Go ahead, Rory.
Good Chair. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Alan, for presenting the report today. Just on behalf of my own party, Sinn Féin, we would welcome the initiatives, some of which Alan referred to there, contained within the report, and indeed I've had the pleasure of being part of some of them myself, such as those involved with the peace initiatives. As well as that too, we would expect to see further progress in terms of language policy, and that would include obviously the bilingual street name policy as we're coming out of COVID in the coming months. and I'd also like to see within it the advancement or the progress on employment of residents within the city and district who have learning disabilities as per previous council commitments. So just to say thanks again to Ellen for the report and indeed the work that has went into it. And on behalf of Sinn Féin, I'd be happy to propose the recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Rory, for that. Any other indicated speakers, or is there a seconder for the recommendations that are there before us?
Chair.
Okay, I think that was Councillor Mooney, was it seconding? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Councillor McClintock Henry. Oh, sorry, Alderman McClintock, go ahead, Henry.
I was just going to second that, Chair. Happy with the report, and thanks to Ellen for bringing it before us. So that has already been seconded, so that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Folks, no other indicated speakers on this item. It's been proposed and seconded, so I'm going to take it as agreed. Thank you, and move on to then item 10 is the mayoral hospitality and gifts policy. Back to Ellen.
Through you, Chair, as part of our sort of policy review, we have bringing forward to members for approval an updated mayoral hospitality and gifts policy. The current policy is overdue for review, and it has been in place since the new council was established in 2015. It was to be reviewed last year, but because of the cessation of any mayoral engagements, it just seemed inappropriate. The policy itself, as I say, has remained substantially unchanged. However, it uses the new policy format and reflects a number of minor changes, which really are tying down the language of the policy, and they are outlined in the report. The policy itself has been screened out for equality impact assessment and doesn't require any further detailed assessment in terms of climate change, adaptation, rural need, or data protection. The fact, I suppose, that's highlighted there that we're trying, where possible, the mayor's discretion to use locally sourced gifts and hospitality, again, is compatible with our sustainable development responsibilities. And the recommendation in front of members, please, is that, subject to members' comments, that the updated policy is approved. Thank you, members.
Okay, thank you for that, Ellen. Again, open it up from the floor for any comment or any proposals.
I would propose the recommendation coming forward here. I would just thank Ellen for the report coming forward.
Okay, thank you for that. Alderman Devaney, is there a seconder?
Yeah, I'll second the Chair, Emmett. Thank you, Ellen.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Doyle. Again, proposed and seconded, no other indicated speakers, so I'm treating that as agreed. Thank you, folks. Moves us on then to item 11, which is the nominations for the NILGA Accredited Learning Programmes 21-2022.
And again, through you, Chair, the report is, as you said, to nominate members onto the local planning programme and to approve a further member to enrol on the NILGA leadership programme. This report follows up on a report to the previous meeting, highlighting that and highlights the fact that there are credit programmes available both for local planning programme and for the leadership programme, which actually help build the capacity and the transferable skills and also provide accreditation to elected members. At the elected member development group meeting held on the 21st of June, members acknowledged that 4 members had expressed an interest in enrolling on the leadership programme, and this was actually an issue that was brought up at the last meeting. Those members are identified in under item 2.5, and also, as I say, the group agreed that there was sufficient monies within the budget for member development to allow 4 candidates to go forward this particular year. In terms of the planning programme, it's suggested that this has been a sort of a very useful course in the past, providing in-depth knowledge and guidance to elected members, but that in the first instance, participation in any programme going forward be given to members of the planning committee. So therefore, as I say, members are provided in the report with an indication of costs, again, all of which can be accommodated within the member development budget. And the recommendations in front of members is to nominate the 3 members to the planning programme, plus any additional reserve members which, as I say, subject obviously to us being able to secure additional spots within the NILGA programme, and also to formally approve that 4th member to undertake the leadership programme. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. A couple of indicated speakers in the chat box, including Councillor Rory McHugh, declaring an interest as a member of that working group. So happy enough to go to Alderman McClintock first. Hilary, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Ellen, for the report. I would just like to nominate Alderman Keith Kerrigan to the NILGA Local Planning Programme, please. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Hilary. Do we need a seconder for that, Ellen, if possible? I suppose we do need for these to be proposed and seconded, each one.
I'll second it, Chair. Alderman Devaney.
Okay, Alderman Devaney as a seconder if we need it. Thank you. Next was Councillor Heaney. Go ahead, Connor.
Okay, Chair, apologies. I thought needed to nominate Councillor Duffy, but I see she's already on the leadership course, so I'll just withdraw that, so that's fine.
Okay, thanks for that, Connor. Alderman Hussey, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I've been contacted by, on behalf of the Chair of Planning, Philip McKinney, who would have an interest. So I'm content to nominate Philip for that particular course. I think members will agree it would be appropriate that the new Chair of Planning would attend the course. I would also be interested myself, but I'm content to sit as on the reserve list until such time as the places are filled, or if members feel that that would be appropriate, and if there is somebody else who has a desire to attend the planning course. But I would nominate, as I say, Councillor McKinney as Chair of Planning, and be content to be on a reserve list myself. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Alderman Hussey. Is there a seconder for your proposal?
I'll second that, Chair. I'll second that.
Councillor Mooney, thank you. Folks, no other nominations coming forward at this stage, but we're happy with the nominations that have been received. So I'm happy enough to take that item as dealt with. And Ellen, is there anything else you want to add before we move on?
Yeah, just through you, Chair, if we could just formally approve the 4th member to undertake the leadership course. Thank you.
Okay, so just a proposal then for 5.2 on the recommendation.
So proposed.
Yeah, thanks, Alderman Hussey. And the seconder?
Seconded, Alderman Devaney.
Okay, thanks, Marsh. Okay, members.
Thank you, members.
Folks, can I have a proposal then to treat items 12, 13 and 14 as read, and then take a proposal to go into confidential?
So proposed that we take them as read and go into confidential. Alderman Devaney.
Seconded.
Thanks, Emmett. Okay. Members, we'll just wait a moment now for IT to confirm that we've gone into confidential, and then we'll move on to the next item. So Paul or whoever's on IT duties this afternoon, if